arts for grad school. And then when I hit a moment where in all of it, I really loved writing. And now I am focused almost entirely on writing and the various modes of that.
There's a lot of different modes of writing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot. Well, the class that I met you in was effective speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what we had to do within effective speaking was writing and writing out our speeches and writing about ourselves and talking about ourselves and really putting ourselves out there.
Mm-hmm. You should do that in all classes, right?
I think so. I
Mm-hmm.
definitely think so. I think I grasp so much from it, experientially, right?
Yeah.
So just being able to step into it. But is being able to step into a character too, or to like play out a role as well,
Mm-hmm.
which was pretty cool. And being able to step into that character and stepping into a role is a theme that carried with me throughout academia and throughout my studies, and which has led me into some of the work that I'm doing now in terms of consciousness studies. Because I don't remember the name of one of the speeches, but one of the first ones that I had to do with you, I ended up coming in like some dance outfit, and I'm forgetting like a big red tutu. And I got the funny looks of like walking around school in this tutu all day, but at the same time, I never felt more comfortable and more myself. And so, like, this tutu theme carried with me into my master's. So, for my capstone project, I ended up doing a performance piece that involved this tutu among some other costume changes and things like that. But it brings us into like the larger scope of the power of arts. I think the transformative aspect of art too. We were talking a little bit yesterday about what we would be talking about today too. And we're 20 minutes in too, so if you want to stop at an hour, we can. But at the same time, we have until 5 o'clock, and I'd love to pick your brain all morning if I could. So I would have got you here. So let's see. For our greater listeners out there, one of the themes that I brought up, and I think I mentioned it a little bit last week on the first of the month, but April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month here in Washoe County, and has been for the last 6-7 years now since my master's thesis. So for my capstone project, so I did this performance piece, and there was a performance element to it, a writing element to it. There was a dance, choreography, musical element to it, a spoken word element, a little bit of magic on stage kind of stuff, and this big giant unicorn, life-size unicorn. I have a writable unicorn in my garage. I've used it for a number of different projects too, different things. I take it out for Earth Day, and I've done like a few photo shoots with it. But anyway, um, my life is so weird, Miah. Uh, my unicorn is gold now, um, but it goes into whenever. So my latest thing with my unicorn, it all kind of ties all together here. What I wanted to do this summer was play human statue because my unicorn's gold, and so I paint myself gold, and I've got like a gold bodysuit. And I did it one time to test out the paint downtown because I've taken it for walks downtown, and every time people ask me, they're like, what is this unicorn for? Why are you out?" And usually I'm just like, "Well, I'm just out walking my unicorn." You know, like people walk their dogs. And they look at me funny, but when it feels like the right person, it opens up the larger conversation into this Sexual Assault Awareness Month and why the unicorn is there, and this performance piece that I did, and how I had to talk about my experiences of going through sexual trauma throughout my life and how that's impacted me in different ways. And then the community opened up and provided their feedback as well. And there was the proclamation. And like it just took on all of this, like, wow. But I think more than anything, and what we got to yesterday is where like trauma and art meet together is this place of identity and knowing the self and who is the self and like what are you and what do you do. And I think when we go through really traumatic things, like right now we're like collectively with this COVID thing going through a traumatic thing, and I think a lot of people, maybe more like here in Reno too, like there's the dissociation that happens where we just step out of our bodies and we're surviving, like we're kind of on autopilot. And then after the traumatic event happens or after this thing happens, we're able to process the event and encode it, incorporate it into our body and ourselves. Then we start having problems, and then we start having issues and questioning reality and who we are and what goes on. And yeah. And so I'm curious to know what your experience writing has been like in that, and especially within the pieces that you do, because you get into very personal material. I mean, even in your classes, you're just very raw and authentic, but there's point and purpose to it. Like when you approach your artwork, there's definite intention there. Can you speak to that?
Sure. There's so many kind of points of entry into everything that you just said. But I mean, when it, first to just address um, kind of moments of trauma and kind of where our mind, where our consciousness is at during that. I mean, it immediately brings us into um, presence, and just because of the urgency. And I think a lot of times that has us, um, it creates a shift in consciousness. And I feel like, for example, the COVID phenomenon, I think that what it has done is created this shift in like the space that we take up. I think that people are realizing that are not they're not being in solitude with themselves often enough in the everyday, and that there's almost this collective consciousness of you don't need every moment to be productive. And I think that's a consciousness shift, and I even think it might be collective. um, it's just emerging all at the same time, and that's exciting because you begin to see a wisdom forming because of this shift. And so I'm excited about that. So that was one thing. um, for my work, um, I think it's all of it has a rawness to it, because the writing itself is me trying to make present a series of things that I want to understand that usually involve observations or experiences of trauma mixed with other phenomenon. And the writing itself brings me into a presence of mind where I am able to collapse all of these various elements, some traumatic, some innocuous, some joyful, and I overlay the patterns of them all and find kind of a unifying element to them. Um, so the writing, and maybe all art, but certainly my writing, becomes a way for me to have presence of mind, and to then be able to take moments that could be determined as traumatic and turn them into wisdom. So, it makes me think of the poem by Aeschylus, which was, I'm going to butcher it, but
Go for it. It's 3:30 in the morning. We've got excuses.
but Aeschylus wrote the poem where it was like, pain is blood, and that blood falls like drops on the heart, and through it becomes wisdom. And so that's the goal.
Yeah. I like that. It's the alchemy of it. It's transformation, it's movement. And I think with writing especially, I love writing too. I've been journaling my whole life, it feels like. Or it's like the undertone to all the art is the writing. But there's this, like, I think you have to be very careful with words, or you speak to like phenomena and phenomena with words and words with consciousness. And we start playing into like the neuro-linguistic programming of the collective and what the words are. Well, I guess simply where I'm trying to get with this is when we're using words or saying words, for one, the words paint very different pictures in people's heads. Like a cat, like if you're to picture a cat, the picture of a cat in your head is going to be very different than the picture of a cat in my head, though we can agree that, this over here is probably a cat.
Mm-hmm.
But we can also, if we give it context, we can code it so that that cat no longer becomes a cat. The cat becomes, it could be a dog or it could be a boat that we're talking about. So, but like words also have a resonance, right? Like they have a frequency. I'm getting into like the nerdy science stuff. I'm kind of like deep topic just because we found this. But when you're writing and you have to pick words and you have to be very conscious of the words that you're picking because you're painting pictures inside of people's heads and you're programming them, like, right, like you're encoding people's minds. Just, I guess, to speak to the wisdom of it, how would you know, especially within the self, what is it within trusting the self, how do you know that the words that you're writing are done so responsibly or helpful, or like does it really matter, or like when it comes to the emotional charge behind it? Does that make sense?
Of course. Since we all perceive language differently, and obviously there's the denotative or the definitional, right? But the connotation is 99.9% of a word. There is no way to fully kind of control the way a word is going to be summoned in a reader. There's, I would argue that there's never precision with language fully, right? We try to get towards something precise so that we can share a common experience in our, between the writer and the reader. But it's not so much the word as it is the body of words, and knowing full well that everyone is going to have a series of experiences that shape the way that they respond to single words. But when you start to put them into a complex kind of sculptural experience, you might have a better shot at shaping something for the reader, right?
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. But in that process, of course, you're thinking about the reader, but you need to also be summoning the language that is evoked from your own experience, and hopefully kind of present it in a way that is not necessarily relatable, but becomes embodied in the reader. So that it's them having the experience of the way that you've summoned language, and they somehow find empathy in that exchange.
That makes sense too, because then it's an energetic exchange, right? We can
Mm-hmm.
feel it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I mean, and that's when you get into, something a little bit more primal than the kind of the linguistic affect of a word. It's the sonic quality of the word. It's the shape of the word. It's, there's so much kind of tactility to language, in addition to its connotations. And so that's something that I love to cultivate, because that's a little more universal, than connotation is.
It's tricky to do. It can be very challenging.
Oh yeah, but worth it.
It's neat too because some people can capture it very precisely in very, very short pieces. And some people can capture it in something that's very deep, very big, right? That you have to really dedicate yourself to in order to get through.
Hmm.
Just
I
sucked
like
into the new world.
I like both. I've written novels, but I've also written poetry, and the book that just came out is lyrical. It's lyrical prose, very short essays. But they just every single medium has a different. It can have a different effect, and you just have to, as an artist, and this, Kelsey,
Mm-hmm.
as an artist, you have to kind of choose. Okay, what medium is going to best serve the exploration that I want to make right now.
I think the last time I saw you in person was somewhere in Oakland when you were reading poetry at some like group poetry thing a number of years ago.
Oh yeah, that had to be a while ago, huh?
Yeah. I was like at the start of grad school. I think that was maybe like 7 years ago, 6, 7 years ago,
Hmm.
7 or 8. Wow. Do you d Are you ready to read a piece now?
Sure.
Did you time it out? Okay.
Yeah, you said. I mean, I don't like to read for terribly long anyway. So this is probably like 10 minutes. Is that good?
Yeah, perfect. And then we've got a break at the top of the hour for 5 minutes, and then you can decide whether or not you want to join me for the second hour or not.
Hmm.
But yeah, if you would like to read now, you can. You can introduce the book, introduce the piece, and then we'll get into where people can find more of your work and all that stuff too.
Sure thing. Um, so I had a collection of essays, come out. It's called The Fabulous Ekphrastic Fantastic, through a wonderful press, Sibling Rivalry. I love their work. They've published wonderful people like Ocean Vuong um, and Saeed Jones and Kaveh Akbar. Love their work. Um, but this collection is inspired by art. They're all ekphrastic essays, meaning that they are taking the essence of an artwork and then transposing that the elements, the essence, the themes, the shapes, the forms, um, into a linguistic form that takes on its own kind of response. So, Kelsey, to come full circle, um, Interstates, the show that I curated that you were in, was an example of ekphrastic work. Um,
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
and I'm really inspired by that. I love it when work speaks to one another, especially by different artists. Um, and the collection of essays, through this ekphrastic device, is kind of part cultural criticism and part memoir. And it deals with topics like perception and memory, um, and the relationship between those in relation to language. Um, and for me personally, it's a book of forgiveness. Um, the the various transgressions that I've observed, especially with my family and with myself. And so the piece I'm going to read, um, I chose because yesterday we were talking about Zayami, the Japanese philosopher,
Mm-hmm.
and who I would love for you to kind of check out a little bit. Um, and this piece embodies um, his particular philosophy of consciousness. Um, and and so I'm going to read it. It's called The 15th Rock. And there's a superscript. After the Kare Sansui garden in the temple of Ryo-Anji, Kyoto. I was born on the summer solstice in the year of the dragon. I knew growing up that the solstice was the longest day of the year, associated with power and creativity. But I wasn't familiar with the Chinese zodiac until my mother's empath friend, Margaret, widened her eyes upon learning my birth date. She says, "Oh my, a fire dragon, and the first crab in solstice? Fire and water. You'll cook up some powerful stuff. Just make sure you always have a pot on the stove, or there will be a big mess." I am in Kyoto, Japan, the temple of Ryo-Anji. I am sitting on the veranda of the Hojo, viewing the famous dry landscape garden on the temple grounds, tourists wandering around sneaking pictures. The white gravel is meticulously raked in lines traversing the length of the garden, with circles rippling out from the rocks placed asymmetrically in the rectangular space. I am alone. I read in my guidebook that there are 15 stones arranged in the garden, but the stones are placed so that the entire composition cannot be seen at once. In fact, from any angle on the veranda, one can exactly and only see 14 rocks. It is understood that only through enlightenment one would be able to view the 15th rock. I desired enlightenment. I traveled a great distance for it. I came to Japan sadder than I had ever been. To see the 15th rock would have made me feel purposeful, or at least given me validation that I was not altogether a monster. I came to Japan because I made a mess. I was a liar. I had just turned 21, and the throng of friends I surrounded myself with those first years of college had dwindled to a sympathetic handful, and those few were gone for the summer. Instead of sitting alone in my crappy apartment complex, colloquially referred to as Peachtree Garbage, I applied for traveling fellowships on FastWeb, this one a week-long immersion trip through a Japanese-American cultural exchange. I chose Japan, perhaps, because it was one of the first lies I remember telling. In high school, I wove a rich, detailed life history prior to attending Cardinal Gibbons to compel the cliquish boys at the school, and particularly Chris, whom I thought the most beautiful person in the world. The lies shimmied like fringe. I had hung out with Prince backstage at a concert. I was a child of nomadic hippies, and included in that skein, I had lived for a glorious year near the Emperor's Palace in Tokyo. Of course, my classmates had figured me out, eventually. But if it weren't for Chris's pained glare of my betrayal, I would have dismissed them all without feeling an inkling of regret. In other words, I didn't learn my lesson then. I come back to Ryo-Anji Garden the next day, determined to find a vantage that would give me sight of the 15th rock. I need catharsis, a signifier of growth, something literary or cinematic, something that makes a bell ring in the chamber of my resolve. And, like a Western fool, I hunt for it. I turn outward, manifest destiny. Remember, I am 21. I scooch from one end of the veranda to the other in waist-wide increments, sit and count. 14. I scooch again. 14. All the way across. I notice that all 15 rocks can be identified in a combination of vantages, but only 14 from any given view. I didn't lie to elevate impressions, to draw people to me. I lied because I was afraid people would leave. The lies would only begin once we grew close. That's why my lies were more potent. You can imagine how hurtful it must have been to be lied to even after you have come to love a person. It makes the fall that much farther and the ground that much harder. I was alone in Japan just as I was turning 21 because I had fallen far, the farthest I had ever fallen. Just before the semester ended, an anonymous flyer circulated around the academic quad buildings of our tiny liberal arts college. It was entitled The Pathological Liar. It didn't name me explicitly, but being such a small campus, many students, and certainly I, could figure it out. The flyer was a scathing confession, as if written by me, listing things I had said. Some were exaggerated recounts, but many were spot-on lies I indeed had told. That I had been in a punk band in high school, that I had traveled cross-country in a VW bus before I came to college. Most sobering in this faux confession were the things I had confided with vulnerability that were actually true. That my brother was a genius who had fallen into drug and alcohol abuse. That I had been assaulted on a military base as a kid. A student whom I had been friends with compassionately collected and disposed of the flyers as fast as he could, but the damage was done. I couldn't walk anywhere on campus without feeling the burning glare of ridicule, or, even worse, of betrayal. I even received sneers, some from students I barely knew. I clutched my books tight and kept my head down. When folks used the phrase, quote, "my world came crashing down on me," I understand the accuracy of the platitude. In the tight bubble of Oglethorpe University's social orbit, my world felt collapsed, and gravity pulled me down until I was kissing the ground. I had made a big mess. Because here's the thing. I was a loving person, an empathic, deeply feeling person. I lived in the intuitive rhythm of the world, my soul a big open thing. That is what rendered the betrayal that much more painful to those who decided to love me back. I can imagine them questioning if any of the friendship was true, in the wake of my dishonesty. And that's what hurt me most. That those people I loved felt betrayed. And I had no one to blame but myself. And so I am in Japan, in Kyoto, on the veranda of Ryo Anji, looking for the 15th fucking rock. And I fail. I peer from every inch of that veranda and always only 14 rocks. I am alone. I go to Tokyo. I drink tea. I eat lots of food with mayonnaise on it. I buy kirins from vending machines. I walk the streets near the Emperor's Palace, which look nothing like my vividly detailed accounts to Baltimore high school jocks 5 years before. The regret lowers itself in a bucket until it sinks beyond my vision. A stone settles in the deep recesses of my gut. The weight has me glean some kind of understanding with my stranger in a strange land scenario, and I return to Georgia feeling I have grokked something. And I did, sort of. I realized I needed to stop lying, but that was like cutting the tail off a salamander. Another 5 years later, I fell in love with Adam. While in the relationship, there was nurturing, there was kindness, openness, and trust. We communicated where our hearts were while we strolled through our neighborhood. when we made love in a tent filling with thunderstorm rain while camping in the Ozarks. On postcards we'd write to one another. When I spoke, there was a clear, direct language to his heart. Adam fell in love with the best version of myself I had ever been. I felt certain of the love and possessed no fear of abandonment. But when it ended unexpectedly, that fear gurgled up like magma in a rock belly, and I erupted deception that shot up and out, and it went everywhere. I was that ex you roll your eyes about over stories in loud bars with sugary drinks. I slipped into Adam's account, read his emails, and then made up lies that somehow attempted to evoke serendipity, curating a destiny that brought us back together. I'd show up at a concert he was attending and then act surprised when I ran into him. I'd drop mention of places he had just discovered in casual texts. I even bought Phantom of the Opera tickets adjacent to his seats, despite me hating that musical. Oh, Adam, how strange that we are sitting right next to each other. This was also the beginnings of social media, and I can claim to be a true pioneer of catfishing. With this new Facebook application, I created a persona, Seamus, ruddy, black Irish kind of handsome, that befriended Adam, that was dating me. Seamus would confess to Adam that I wasn't over him, that I talked about Adam all the time, ad nauseum infinitum. To make it seem realistic, Seamus even friended many of my other friends, having separate conversations with them, all while he tried to convince Adam that he and I were meant to be together. I was so hell-bent on winning him back with this complex tangle that I didn't even consider the dishonesty of it all. And when it came out that Seamus was my creation, that I had lied to my friends, to Adam, a world that I thought I was shouldering pretty well those last few years crashed down on me again. But this time it was even harder, because I had betrayed myself. Something I thought was part of my past not only resurfaced, but did so without me even recognizing it before I had wound such a cloverleaf of deceit. That not only humiliated me, it scared me. What else was I capable of doing? Chastened and unwell, I moved out of my house in the Highland Park neighborhood of Los Angeles to stay with my friend Dana in her cloistered Los Feliz bungalow. She had an extra room available that summer and offered it to me until I recuperated. I decided instead to reside on the couch on her front porch. I didn't tell her this then, but I felt unworthy to fully accept such an open-handed and civil offer as a bedroom. The four walls seemed too generous. During this convalescence, I laid on that couch for hours a day, staring at the trees that surrounded Dana's bungalow, counting the leaves of the magnolia branch that hung to the eave of the house. I read pages from a book, then I stared out from the small world of the porch, read and stared. It was this time on Dana's porch that I came to realize that I often curated my life, tried to arrange it for maximum effect, especially in an effort to keep those I loved from ever leaving. But in that rigorous effort, I forgot that I was part of the arrangement too. I can't tell you the exact moment I realized this, what I was reading, or what inspired me to think in this way particularly, but I know I was on that soft, ratty couch, surrounded by the trees, my books, and hopelessness. And this, dear reader, was a true, honest-to-goddess catharsis, almost cinematic in its impact. My mind traveled back to Kyoto, to Ryo-on-ji. I was the 15th rock. I was the 15th rock. And so are you. And if we are all the world's 15th rock, we must be what we want the world to be. That is the arrangement. It is so embarrassingly simple to share it in writing here in this essay. Yet no realization has impacted me with that sort of velocity since. It was a bona fide grokking. Soon after the couch catharsis, my roommate Erwan and I found a cottage of our own in the heart of Hollywood. Soon after that, I would begin teaching visual culture at an art school, and my new life would commence. This new life would less and less feel the fear of abandonment, because I understood that to feel abandoned is to not recognize oneself as an intrinsic part of the world. There is no abandonment. There is leaving, but even that is merely moving along the same plane in a different direction. I am as much as everything else, an interconnected arrangement, a single curation with infinite forms. I must be what I want the world to be. What a thing to recognize. I had much to become. One of the first lessons of my visual culture course involves the Kare Sansui Garden at the Ryo-Onji Temple. I show a map of Japan, pictures of Kyoto, the temple, then the garden itself, its white gravel and mossy stones. I begin the lesson with a simple fact. Ryo-Onji means dragon at peace.
Awesome.
Yeah,
It was beautiful.
that's the first time I've ever read that one aloud.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that here with us.
Of course. Thank you.
Very exciting. I like how it ties all of the different pieces together too. It gives so much to think about.
And that's kind of the goal in my work, is that I try to bring the presence of many things into kind of a space for them to be considered together.
It's the integral thing, and that's why you pointed me to the California Institute of Integral Studies of all things, because it mixes all things together.
Yeah.
Well, you pointed me there because I had applied to an art therapy school somewhere else, and we brought up art therapy in our conversation a little bit yesterday. And when I applied to the program at Naropa, I didn't get in. They told me my interests were too diverse. Right. They were. They're definitely too diverse. There's so many different facets that we can take consciousness to, and all of these different things. We've got like a minute and a half or so before we go on break. Miah, where can people find your work?
Oh, well, you can go to Sibling Rivalry Press, or better yet, you can go to bookstore.org, which is kind of like an Amazon that actually supports real bookstores. So try not to use Amazon, but bookstore.org is a new repository that's kind of like the Amazon for people that care about local bookstores.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see. Do you want to join me for the second hour of this, or are you going to go back to bed?
I would love to slumber if you don't mind.
You got it. You got it. I don't blame you. I've got a snuggly little toddler the next room over. It's always a tough one getting up in the morning. I always have to make that decision. I really appreciate this space in the morning. So thank you, Miah, Jeffra. Thank you, Revolution Radio, for tuning in. I'll see you at the top of the next hour. And again, Miah, thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Kelsey.
Good morning and welcome back, everybody. Revolution Radio. Good to see you. Welcome back to Studio A in Cultivating Consciousness. I'm your hostess, Kelsey Sweet. We're here on freedomslips.com. What is it? We're at the beginning of April. The world is on a quarantine from this pandemic. When it comes to consciousness and self and shifting things around, I tell you what, like, things are definitely in an interesting time and space. So when I think it comes to the cultivation of the little seeds we plant, now is a very important time to consider what we're watering all of our thoughts with, no? At the beginning of my hour here, I had my guest, Miah Jeffra, on with me. I'm still trying to let this one sink in. Miah went back to sleep. Lucky Miah. I'm envious. Maybe lay there and consider all these other things we can talk about. No, this is a whole thing about cultivating consciousness in the morning, right? And so I'm trying to figure out, okay, where do we steer this ship this morning? The state of the world is pretty interesting. We're going to steer this ship right back into freedomslips.com. We're going to steer it right into the donation button. There you go. You know where that button is? It's on our website. It's at the top, right next to the store. You can go to the store. You can buy t-shirts and stuff too. Why not? You can make a payment to Revolution Radio. You can send us some information. If you have any questions, you can send an email or a phone call. You know, there's ways you can support us as we sit here doing our best. I know at least I'm doing my best to try to support you as you help support me through this. It's a mutual agreement. It's a symbiotic relationship here we're building and cultivating consciousness. Okay then, so, well, it's April. So April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month here where I'm at in Washoe County. And why is that? Well, it's because art is an amazing tool and it's a powerful, powerful thing. And when we open ourselves up to being vulnerable and authentic and raw and real through the arts, amazing things can happen. Transformations can happen. Growth can happen. And the writing sample that Miah had read from in the first hour, there's so many key points, and I have so many questions, and so now I'm left to like bounce all this around in my head and then try to like put it out on the paper. It's almost like, okay, the teacher gives you the assignment and then you gotta go write about it, except for the mentor gives you the assignment and then now you gotta go talk about it on air live. Okay, I'm gonna synthesize it all and process it. The point that sticks out to me, I think, in that piece is the aspect of lying. Because I think when we're being authentic and raw and honest and vulnerable, right, we have to be really real. We have to be very discreet. Like, it's tough to do in so many different ways. I mean, people do it for so many different reasons. But I'm trying to think it like, okay, so what things am I not being honest with about myself in this life? And how are things... Why don't things sync up and align? Like, why don't things make sense, right? Like, when we're trying to figure all these things out. And I bring all this to the forefront because I've been in this place of aspect of, right? I don't know if it's something that's going on with the stars or something astrologically, or if everything is just aligning up because it's divine timing and blah, blah, blah. How do you not over intellectualize the primal, the very raw feelings, right? If it doesn't come out poetically and it doesn't come out academically, it comes out, at least for me, in this garbled bridge of nonsense. So thanks for bearing with me this morning. I've got some tea with me. I brought my book back out too, because I might dive back into that at the end of the hour. We'll see how it goes. I always feel like I'm going to run out of things to say and run out of time, but there's always plenty of information we could channel in and put into the ethers. And if I have it handy, maybe I'll pull a card from a deck and kind of align us and get things situated, or kind of point things in a direction, because with it being April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and with it being the COVID quarantine for an indefinite time, kind of at this point, although people are in different areas responding to the situation similarly, I mean, there's definitely differences across the board. Okay. So, right, my mind this morning is just blown. I don't know a buffer. Okay. I just have all this information like downloading into my brain right now. I'm sorting through it and sorting through the files and trying to pinpoint us into a direction, because during this month, have, especially in the past, been very vulnerable and been very raw and have been very explicit about a lot of the experiences that I've gone through that have led to this whole sexual assault thing, and this is like prior to Me Too. And then post Me Too stuff, there's like the sex and the art scene where it's community forum, where it's geared towards bringing people together to have conversations on what to do next. You know, right? Like, because you get up on your soapbox and you have the conversations of, like, you know, this happened to me, so and so did this, this is blah, 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 this is yada, 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 you know, and then people are like, well, you know, this happened to me, and then I don't know how many of you have had this happen to you, but people are, you know, I've never told anybody this, but, you know, this has happened to me, and it's a lot of information, it's a lot of emotional energy to bear and to take on. And so I feel like, especially collectively, it's like we're at this point of like, well, now what? And one of the points we hit on in the first hour, Miah made mention of this, of I think people now are experiencing difficulty in being alone. And I'm trying to wrap my head around this because I'm an only child of a single parent, and I grew up very alone. I grew up very by myself for years. You know, I started staying home alone when I was 8 years old. And I've lived on my own for a number of years, and I've gotten to travel quite a bit. Decent, I wouldn't say quite a bit. I didn't get to go very far, at least as far as I wanted to, right? But I never really stayed in the same place. I still kind of have a hard time sitting still, right? Like, but I have to ground in and sit still and center and plant roots. You know, I have a kid. It's a different phase in my life. I'm stepping into a different me, a different rite of passage in so many different ways. And at the beginning of fall last year, the beginning of the fall semester, I started my PhD studies, and I'm on a leave of absence right now. And here's the world collapsing, and this whole academic year, at least, has been an exploration in self and identity and who am I. And I went from being an INFJ to an INFP, just like if you're into Myers-Briggs at all and you speak that language, there's a subtle shift, but it's a broad, it's a vast field space consciously to shift into. I guess it's going from a judging to a perceiving, right? Allowing things to happen. If you take judgment out, if things aren't good, if things aren't bad, it's a matter of truth and what is real and what's right in front of us. What tools do we have? What resources are available here and now? It's the mindfulness, it's the presence. Because if we're trying to co-create a future that's positive, I don't like the positive negative words because they're judgment words. I don't like the fluffy new agey words very much, but different. It's that Aquarian age. It's shifted. It's a shiftrant, a shifting difference, a difference. Whatever that is. Did I make up a word? So the lies of things, and the thing that I've been thinking about, maybe if I say it out loud, right? If I put it out there, if we make it real, if we make it tangible, what am I not lying or hiding from myself? Those are the things, right? Because as soon as you say it, as soon as you put it out there, as soon as you make it real, you can't take it back. Especially when it comes to initiatives and forums, and if art is recognized in any sort of way, it haunts you in an aspect. And if you want to really relive this experience, this emotion or not, if you want to relive this trauma over and over, how do you re-encode it into your being, rewire it? It goes back to the neuro-linguistic programming, right? They do this through hypnotherapy. They do this through other I don't want to say like other therapies, but like other types of like dialectic behavior therapy comes to mind. I think that's the first place I heard that term, if not within school, right? So when we're, especially with words, we're wiring and programming our being and our essence, and when we're putting ourselves out there and when we're speaking of our experiences, be it sexual trauma, be it a COVID thing, be it just like something that happened to you at the grocery store that's really not a big deal but really bothered you, like, do you talk about it or not? Well, if you suppress and if you hold in these emotions, it's a toxic energy, right? If it doesn't allow the channels of expression to flow through, it builds up and it creates chaos and it creates all this noise in our life, right? And it's hard to empathize with other people. I mean, if that's what we had talked about in the first hour with Miah, if that's what we had talked about, the point of art being is to build relationships and empathy, right? It's not necessarily trying to get somebody to see exactly what's in your head. It's getting them to relate and to empathize with you, to feel, right? Oh God, feelings are so gross. If you don't move them, right? If you don't get them out of you, if you don't process them in a healthy way, they can be. What are you hiding from? What are you avoiding? Why are things not working out in your life? And it goes back to this sex and the art scene. This April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. What do I talk about if I don't want to keep talking about all the things that I've talked about before? Well, what's really going on in my life now? Do I want to talk about that? How raw and vulnerable do I feel about that? And because I think there's this one thing that I've learned a lot, especially in the last couple of years, of I would say 5 years or so of my life, is that you have to be very careful of how you idolize people. And I think Maya's choice of writing sample to read from is an interesting one, like in relationship to like what's going on with myself in my life, because this is from the point of his life before I met him, right? And we always have this idea of when we meet somebody, be it a teacher, a mentor, a guide, a celebrity, anybody we hold up on a pedestal, albeit an author or I think we forget that people are real people, and there's projections, there's these characters that they play. I see it a lot within the arts, within the performance realm. I get to work with so many amazing types of artists and the type of work that I do, and it being integral work. So performance artists and dancers and musicians and people who are in theater and painters and sculptors and so on and so forth. And I think especially in Reno, like people try very hard to portray who they're trying to be. They want to portray a character being. It's therapeutic in a way. It's a coping mechanism, right? It's a way of processing and taking on a lot of changes. I mean, we build these identities that we can function within our lives. Like there's reasons why we do it, but like deeper reasons. And I think emotionally, collectively, because society doesn't allow the space to process so much of this, it forces us into these boxes where we have to be a certain thing, right? We have to look a certain way, and then we're affected by media, especially here in America, where, if you're not one up in the Joneses, if you're not trying to be the all whatever with the best of this and that, I don't know, I've never been one of those people. I've always been an outsider, and I've always been a loner, and I've always been an emotional sponge. So for me, it's always been very difficult to really know who I am and where I fit. And because there are other types of artists too, and I think these very incidental artists, perhaps like myself, where it's hard to know which one to be. It's hard to not know how to be super raw and super true. Because I think one thing that I've also noticed about myself is I can share too much at times, especially in personal relationships. Like when I really get to know somebody, I feel like I can trust somebody and open up to them. I can share very like raw details about myself or things, or just very, I like to push the edges in relationships. I like to push the boundaries, I think, because I think I like to be alone. I like this alone space. And I think when people start getting too close, I begin to push them away. And so I challenge the relationship with these very heavy truths. So it's like, it's almost like the opposite of a lie, where it's just too much. And I think it confronts people with these realities or something within them, or I don't know, there's this unexpected thing that happens where it makes me feel like I'm doing something wrong, right? Or if I just feel very like raw and vulnerable, plus I retract within myself and I like just isolate even more. So as far as the world's being in isolation right now, I'm digging this. I'm very entertained by it. As awful as it is there's a pandemic and people aren't dying, and like we have to be very cautious and very mindful. We have to put into practice these things of consciousness. We have to walk our consciousness talk, right? We're all thinking it. It's that morphic resonance theme that keeps it popping up and appearing. And if one day I can talk to Rupert Sheldrake on here about morphic resonance and my thoughts and ideas about that, and the arts and what all this is. I have so many questions. Like, I think we're all headed in the right direction, in a positive direction. It's just natural. We're evolving. We can't not take all this information that we know. We can't not naturally tap into this light being, these light channels. I think we're being supercharged with all this energy and electricity, where if we allow ourselves to adapt to it and adapt alongside of it and build and grow with it, we go with the flow, right? I think everything will be okay. We definitely have to be cautious, and we have to think long term and think ahead. And it's not going to be easy. I think that's the hardest thing about growth and transformation. Because, well, like with my guest, with Miah, I met Miah as a teacher while I was in art school. It was a very like brief stint of like time, and just this little blip. But so much happened in such a short period of time that it like radically transformed my life and set me on this path where, as far as academia goes, I didn't stay in art school. I ended up staying 3/4 out of a full year because there was a program that was dropped, and it just created this impulse or this drive within me towards activism, I think. And I started realizing, and I was at least being pushed and guided, and realizing that when I speak up and when I have a voice, when I do decide to step out of my shell and into the collective, there's an impact and there's an impulse. And there's been very good things that have happened, and there's been very bad things that have happened, and there's definitely been things that I've done in life, right? That have created chaos, as we all have. And we can definitely take responsibility for the faults that we have in our lives. Some of us can. Some of us overly fault ourselves at times to the point of destruction, right? That very self-destructive thing. If we're not self-constructing, then we're probably self-destructing. This is the life I was in for a very long time. Not feeling worthy, not feeling good enough, right? Because when I would be my most raw, when I would be my most vulnerable, it's not so much that there was a fear of being accepted or not, but I definitely noticed there was a reaction. It's like a chemical reaction between people. And I'm a research psychologist. This is what I've turned into. So, if you will, imagine me sitting in a coffee shop as a research psychologist with my sketchbook, selecting the odd people in the group, odd characters, and watching interactions. I'm a behavioral psychologist, mind you, so I'm trying to be aware of behavioral patterns and chains, and I like to make jokes. So subtle humor to myself, I'll chuckle in a corner. I can keep myself entertained for a really long time. If you could see my studio now, I'm surrounded by entertainment. If you left me to my own devices for a long time, I think the creations that would come out of it would be interesting, for sure, right? But it's that confidence in that self. And in this space, in this realm where we can explore and relate to the environment. Oh, I'm getting sidetracked, right? What time is it? If you're on the East Coast, is it like 7 o'clock? It's almost 8 o'clock in the morning. Are you at work yet? Maybe not. Before you head out the door, we're just waking up. It's my time. It's 4:20. We're going to spend the room. We're going to cleanse the space. We're going to kind of recenter and refocus because I am going off on a tangent here. And I can do this for a really long time because that's cultivating consciousness. And I don't want to overwater the seeds this morning, if you have it. I've been planting a lot of seeds lately. I've been working on the gardening and I'm going to take my shot at planting some more vegetables. I managed miniature watermelons last year. I don't have the greenest of thumbs. I don't know. I like collaging. As fun as dirt and being outside is. It's my parents are both into that. So anyway. Good morning, Revolution Radio. Thank you. Oh, again, I don't do my own plugs very often. We've got about a half hour left of the show. If you want to know more about me, if you're just tuning in or if you're kind of following me now and you're like, what is this lady talking about? You can go to kelseysweet.com. You can find more information about me there, KELSEYSWEET. Find me on Facebook. You can chat with me there. You can find me on Skype if you want. I mean, I'm through here. You can email me. You can call me. There's a lot of different ways you can reach out and connect to me. It can be kind of difficult to connect with at times, but, I mean, when it's meant to happen, it's definitely meant to happen. I think when people find me, there's definitely like a point and purpose and a reason for it. And so I like this radio space time because it allows me to open my channels and connect to the present time and the here and now on a collective level so that I can see what happens as it happens, right? Learn to trust myself in this process. So thank you so very much for joining me in this and experimenting with me. This is what this is. It's a social experiment. I'm a PhD student, so who knows what this will turn into in the future. And an artist, so who knows? Who knows? Anyway. So, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month here in Washoe County where I'm at, as well as other places too. this thing didn't happen. We just jumped on the bandwagon, or like there was this initiative that was wanting to be in place, and so they just used me as an excuse to get it. Basically, is what happened. But what I've talked about in the past is like personal experiences, how the community has responded and not responded, attempts at taking initiatives. But I feel like within the scope of, like, if I'm going to be honest, this is what I'm being inspired with this morning. I'm going to be honest. I don't think any of it works. Like, people really don't care, none of it really matters. And I feel like even like especially now that there's this pandemic, right? Government systems are shut down. So when it comes to issues of sexual assault and domestic violence, like even Trump changed the definitions of domestic violence. And I mean, it took women a really, really long time to expand the definitions to really be able to protect them, right, on these very subtle levels. Because when it comes to abuse, when it comes to especially sexual violence, there's such a spectrum and a vast array of it, and it is so common. I heard the comment made yesterday. I think Miah had recommended I read or listen to a TED Talk by Tandy Newton on the self, right, and the transformation of the self, and it was in reference to this other author. I wrote it down and I stuck it over here. Okay, I'm getting sidetracked, sorry. But so through talking about the self and through these realizations, she makes a really good point in it. If you can't find it, I'll see if I can find it. I posted it up on my Facebook page. If I start searching for it, I'm going to get super sidetracked, and I'm searching for it, so I'm just like super sidetracked myself again. Because I think it's important to share this. I'm going to put it in the group chat. Embracing otherness, embracing myself, right? Because if I'm going to be honest, when it comes to doing this work in sexual assault awareness or like advocacy, like I don't feel like it does anything. I don't feel like people are really listening. I don't really feel like people care. And so when it comes to standing up for myself, or when it comes to talking about the things that are really bothering me, right, on a very personal level in a very public space, because I have these platforms, like it just doesn't really sound very much, I don't know, it just doesn't sound appealing. Okay, so I found this link on my Facebook page, and I'm just trying to copy and paste it. It's gonna open and play if I click it this way, but I have to find the link, so bear with me. This live streaming social media stuff is silly sometimes, but I love it.
One of the great challenges.
Oh, yes, it's one of the great challenges in this world. Thank you, Neil deGrasse Tyson, for popping in with your divine timing. Here's this link to, and embracing otherness and embracing myself, because collectively we are going through a big change, and we are going through a big shift. My mentor recommended to me this yesterday, and so I'm going to share it with you this morning. If you're on the Facebook, or if you're on chat. Okay. So like when I talk, like I have to talk about my personal life and all this, like things are still difficult and things are still hard. And here, especially with my master's, I try to take on this initiative where I got my community involved, and I got people who I considered friends involved, and I thought, okay, they're going to take this information and they're going to learn from it, and they're not going to do anything bad. they get it. They're a part of it. They support it. But in the long run, like, the person who welded my unicorn, a couple years later, that this forum was stemmed off of, was accused of rape. And this whole performance piece was about, overcoming being raped and other, like, aspects of sexual trauma. And then another person who participates in it also gets sucked into a situation where they're intertwined in, I would say, a toxic relationship and something mutually abusive and something just spiraled out of control, right? Where, like, the coping mechanisms just aren't there. And then my co-parent, my co-partner, and the whole thing, like, my co-partner became co-parent, and we're trying to juggle and navigate that. And the whole thing is just so emotionally overwhelming. And it's easy enough to, like, put my own stuff aside and just focus on, the advocacy of it. To focus on the, do what's right, walk your whatever. But when it comes down to it, and the truth of the matter, like, I'm just in this very toxic environment, in these toxic relationships, and just feeding into, and it seems like enabling this lack of respect, this violation of boundaries, this, like, what is that? And this is something that I've had to explore with myself for a very long time, and this is something that astrology has helped me to make sense of. And when it comes to recovering from trauma or going through PTSD recovery and finding various forms of alternative health and therapies and, like, healing tools and modalities, I mean, I've experienced and gone through quite a bit. I laugh because, like, at the end of the day, what else can you do? We put ourselves on these journeys, especially when we go on healing journeys and transformation journeys, and we learn that we can continue to dive deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into ourselves. I think that's the scariest part of it. It's like deep sea diving into alone time. Like, people 2 weeks are, like, freaking out. They're like, 2 weeks alone. What am I gonna? Really? What about 2 months? 2 years? Like, that's torture. Like, that's where things start. That's where your head really starts. I think the people who are falling apart now, or who have, like, just the minor things that are collapsing, let it fall apart, allow it to crumble, let it dissolve away, because you'll realize what's left standing, with the foundation that is left, is the love and light, right? It's the essence, it's the bonding, it's the community, it's the creativity. Because on the opposite end of destruction is creativity. We can be creative people if we're destructive people, and if we're creators, we're destroyers, right? If we're creating something, out with the old, in with the new, it's cyclical. But you don't want to just go round and round and round in the same cycle. We have to ascend, right? The universe spins, it's a spiral. If we're going in a direction, we have to propel ourselves. There's a propulsion and a movement. So onward with us, Starship Warriors, little light beings, the humans of the world. In the last couple of weeks, I've been trying to I haven't been trying, right? I've been working on and building this course, How to Be a Human, and I'm so excited to release it. I'm almost done. I always say that. I can just, like, keep going and going and building and building and building and adding and adding and adding onto it. No, but really, hopefully by next week. Or by the end of this week. I thought it would be done by last week, but I have a toddler, so bear with me. It snowed the other day. We went sledding. It was lovely. Right in the backyard. We didn't have to go very far. We built the snowman. Had a snowball fight. It was so cute. But okay, so I have these platforms, right, where when it comes to leadership, we lead by example, and when it comes to transformation and transforming in a way, I have found within the arts over the years that social media especially has been such an amazing platform for divulging and expressing and experimenting and collecting data and collecting tidbits and samples that I can piece into other things, whether it be an art piece or a writing piece or an academic sample or whatever. There's a lot of information, right? It's just information gathering, information hoarding at the end of the day. But it's tracking my consciousness. It's cracking the evolution of my consciousness over time through art, through these different residues that my body can create. It's the residue of the meat suit. It's the things that I've been able to leave behind, right? The resolves. It's weird. It's fascinating to look back on. Or to look at growth. And I think that's why writing can be so powerful. Especially if you journal. I mean, whether you share it with people or not, poetry or not, to put it down on paper and to synthesize it in such a way allows you to process it. I mean, there's research studies, like psychology research studies, that will show you why that works and how that works. And then there's the other side of it too, where even Miah said it's the first time he's read that particular piece out loud. And when you read something out loud, and you really allow yourself to feel the resonance of your voice and the emotions, and you dissociate from the moment, when you take yourself out of the moment and you put yourself into this imaginary realm and you feel it and you empathize with yourself or your past self or this projection of a future self, you can come to some pretty amazing and powerful, liberating levels of consciousness within yourself. I mean, this is what healing is about. This is what therapy helps you get to. This is the knight's journey. You're trying to accomplish something, whatever your archetype is, however you want to look at that. You can look at the story, right? If we're talking about archetypes when it comes to humans and people, we're not super unique in our individual selves, and you find that when you have to be alone and you dive into the oneness and you dive into the feeling and that collective ether of emotional energy, because that's what our artistic expression is, that emotional energy, and we express that outward. And when it comes to things that are very traumatic and that can be triggering, especially when it's a whole month long of here's all this sexual assault, blah 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 blah. Trigger warning. What's the point if people aren't going to change and people aren't going to make differences? Pardon me. And I've seen it a lot where the ego comes in and people don't want to take accountability. They don't want to take responsibility for their actions. They want to play victim, or they want to paint such a strong picture for other people that other people reinforce this identity that they've built for themselves. Because if that collapses and that crumbles and they don't have that, well, heaven forbid they be alone and have to work through their real traumas and those real things. They've created this platform to live from, so they don't have to live in the reality of what had happened to them. You know, they create a reality for them that feels more real. There's a sense of control where they can like paint the picture. It's, I don't see, this is where teaching responsibility and creativity is really important. There's, because the wisdom comes into play when you understand you have the power to create something and to write something and to empower somebody. You know, what are you empowering somebody toward? And really, you don't have control over what you can bring up in somebody else. Miah had mentioned that. You can't always account for what you unearth or what you trigger within somebody, or how your energy is going to affect them. And I notice that within myself. Sometimes like I can just even walk into a room and people either like me or don't right off the bat. There's this almost ghostly response. I don't know if that's because I'm an intuitive reader or whatever, or like I've just noticed with the work that I do over the years that people's stuff just comes to the surface. And if they're not of pure heart or intention, or like if they don't have a genuine sense of unconditional love towards me, I feel it. You know, if they've got demons, or if they've got something within them that's not jiving, right? Like those things surface. So there's something within me that reacts with that or to that. And so I think, how did I put it the other day? I don't remember exactly to whom I was talking. But in trying to building this class on how to be a human, like light, HUEMYN, how to be a light body, right? Using descriptive words like colors to describe people is like rainbows are expressions of light, right? You're a light body. What is light? Light is fire. And light is electricity, right? Energy. It can be expressed, or you can see it, or like visualize yourself as a light bulb, right? Where like if you're a light bulb, there's the electric wire, you have the light in the middle, and there's the glass bulb, the protective element, the protective bubble, right? The shield, the wall, whatever you have it, have you will. So as the light, right, the light naturally attracts the moths, right? If you're a light bulb and you're attracting the moths, depending on how big your bulb are gonna land on that bulb, depending on how hot your light is, right? Those moths are either gonna like burn and die, or they're just gonna like sit there and collect. And if you have this light bulb, right, and it's collecting all these moths, like it gets pretty dark, right? And it looks dark, and it looks like darkness from the outside, or you just forget that you have this light inside, or you know, it's hard to see, it's dim. But also, if you're the light, why would you want to be a light bulb? Why not be a candle? Why not be a flame? Like the fire, the elements, things of the natural elements. If you're the fire and you don't have a bubble, if you don't have this wall around you, you're not trying to protect yourself, you're not trying to shield yourself, or if you're whatever, right? Like trying to just fit in. If you're trying to attract all these moths to you, I'm trying to be a moth. I don't want to be a light bulb, I want to be a moth, therefore I'll cover myself in moths, and people think I'm the biggest moth of all, because I have so many moths on me, right? Look at all my eyes, I can see everything. It's a panopticon during the pandemic. Anyways, if you're a flame, like a candle, and you don't have this bubble, if you're vulnerable, but you recognize yourself as this light body of consciousness that's always transforming and growing and affecting the environment around you as well, right? Adapting, it's radical adaptation. It's alchemizing anything that comes into contact with it, including those moths, because those moths are going to be attracted to the fire, they're going to be attracted to the light, right? The darkness is always going to be attracted to the light, right? If you're vulnerable and your flames flickering nice and hot, those moths, that darkness is going to come in and it can't ever really touch you, right? If it touches you, it will burn. You'll always be the light, you'll always be seen as the fire, the darkness disappears. It's no longer there. I mean, there's an actual alchemical thing that happens. Things become carbon, right? Ash, dust. It dissolves, it goes back into the elements. The particles break apart. There's combustion. There's a chemical reaction. Just like when people interact. Ooh, it's a good time. It's a lot for first thing in the morning, right? Next week should be interesting too. The next couple, well, since we have a couple more weeks of April, and this is kind of our theme. At the end of the month, I was supposed to do this public forum, right, at the Pioneer Center here in Reno. It would be round two, it would be our second year of doing this, and they're such a gracious host. They donated space last year, and they were going to open their doors to us this year. But now we're all quarantined, and we're told we have to stay 6 feet apart, and we can't gather in groups. And so we're deciding, well, do we make this a digital forum, a digital platform? I'm like entertaining my idea. How the heck am I going to approach this theme this year? These are the tools that I have in front of me. What is most important? Oh, because one of the points I was trying to make earlier, right? Like, with the state of the world, the pandemic is at the forefront of people's mind, whether or not people are getting effed over, screwed, raped, pillaged, assaulted, whether or not there's domestic violence going on. Like, it's just not at the forefront of the government's initiative to protect its people, I suppose. Let's put it that way. It's, at the end of the day, it's a domination tactic. It's a war tactic. That's what Tandy Newton says in this thing too. She mentions in there, that's where I heard this, that rape it's a war tactic. So when we're talking about sexual assault, we're talking about oppression. We're talking about such a big war on humanity, one that we have on ourselves. It's the war that we're playing against each other. It's this idea of separateness and domination. One has to be better than the other. It's this, the Piscean age mentality, this masculine dominance, right? We're supposed to be shifting into the Aquarian age, into the feminine, into the light, into the... We got to get out of the dark ages into the light ages. We have to be mindful about how we use our words. We have to be very conscious with our creations right now, more so than ever. And I think collectively we know that, even the most destructive and the most devious of us. We understand that, and I think as far as the American president goes, it's a catalyst for this radical transformation. It's a revolution, but on a different level. It's in a new way. If we're going to source consciousness from the collective, from a new plane, if we're going to bring in new solutions, we have to do things differently. Whether or not, all judgment aside, things are good or bad, I think if we hold true that we are light and we speak from this place of truth, and we continue to be nice to each other, like Miah pointed out that San Francisco is so graciously doing within itself. Right? Like, if we can just be nice and all figure out how to get along right now, it'll all work out. It's not going to be easy, because we all have to work with our inner selves and our inner demons, and we have to work through our stuff, right? I think where things have been very difficult on the outside, externally, we're preparing ourselves to battle within ourselves. When we get pulled off the grid, or when we get disconnected from social media, when we lose contact with our robots, so to speak, with technology, when we don't have that, we have to go back to our primal sense. Some people will be prepared. Some people can be alone. Some people can be isolated and can survive because they've been in survival mode, especially people who are in like the PTSD. All that is a survival mode. Collectively, we all have that within us. It's all that potential that is there. But let's go beyond potential. You know, the potential is nothing if it's not awakened, if it's not forward moving, if it's not in action. You know, it's where the waking up has to be, if it's not cultivated, right? A seed is full of potential, but if it's not watered, and if it doesn't grow, if it's not given light and nutrients, if it doesn't sustain itself, if it doesn't have a healthy environment, and then what is it? Right? So this is the cultivation of more than just the seed when it comes to consciousness, right? Like, if you're cultivating the seeds of humanity, I mean, we have to do everything. It's integral. It's integrating everything we know. It's wholesomeness, right? It's bringing all of the things together. Because one thing that I learned, especially when it comes to talking to people about really difficult things and how to overcome them or how to resolve them or just accept whatever, right? Talking about it is, I think, one of the most difficult things. And if we approach it from a very singular point, like just the mind, if you just go to a psychologist, so to speak, then you're just addressing the mind. What about the body? What about the spirit? So mind, body, and spirit, right? All the emotional elements, if you integrate all of the things together and find the balance, it will work. A lot of modern psychologists don't address this. They're very one-sided. And I think if you get pigeonholed and you over-intellectualize things, it can definitely be a great space to focus on just mind without having to dive into spirit, without having to have judgment clouded or have your focus clouded by other things. But again, within those boxes, there's limitations. And when it comes to healing and spontaneous recovery, 95% of your health and your well-being is up to you. The 5% is the environment, but it is symbiotic. We all do need each other, right? Just like we need you to help support us here on Revolution Radio. Welcome to Studio A. Good morning. It is the morning in April. We've got Mitchell coming on with Revolution in the Morning on next. It's going to be a great day. I think good things are happening. Right? Thank you all very much for listening in. KelseySweet.com. I'll see you next week for more on cultivating consciousness here on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Thank you much. Okay, yep, I'm signing out. Going back to bed. Good morning and good night and good morning again.